Welcome to Collision, the podcast where we discuss the fun and sometimes complicated collision of real life and trusting God. If you're curious or confused about how to engage the world we live in, we hope our conversation here helps. Now, let's get into this episode of Collision.
Welcome to the Collision Podcast. I am Matt Manning, and today James is grooming his fantastic beard. And so with me is Jonathan Gross, who is a part of our family ministry. And John, it's so good to have you here today. If you were to give James some advice on a beard oil as he is grooming his beard today, what would you suggest to him?
So one of my favorite beard oils is the Cognac and Cuban scent from Opulent Grooming. It's a small business in Atlanta owned by a guy where he's got the kind of beard that automatically gives him all the credentials for selling beard products. And one time I was in the car, Pastor Kim was driving, me and Grant was in the back seat and giving Kim all of these props on how amazing his car air freshener was. And Kim was a little confused. And as Grant kept talking, he mentioned the notes of tobacco. And I realized it wasn't an air freshener. It was actually my beard oil scent just wafting through the car. And so I realized, okay, Cognac and Cubans, that's a win. And Grant kept talking about it and how wonderful I was smelling. And not going to lie, it got a little weird. But also Cognac and Cubans by Opulent Grooming, that's going to be the win.
That's going to be the win. So if James wants to look good in Grant's eyes, go with that. All right. Well, we'll get that to him. Well, I am grateful that you're joining with us today. We're talking about social media. And for all of those out there who don't know, John is really leading our family ministry right now. And it's kind of at the front edge of leading our church through how to think about social media. I think for a lot of Christians, when we think of collisions with real life, social media kind of seeps towards the very top. And for most of us, I would guess that we have kind of this love-hate relationship with social media. I know that's certainly true of me. But as we get going in this conversation today, I thought it would just be fun to talk about like our first ever experiences with social media. And so do you remember when you first got on social media, what the platform was and what the experience was like for you?
Yeah. So for me, I initially got onto social media with MySpace back when I was in high school. This probably would have been in the mid 2000s, I think. And my experience with MySpace kind of came and went fairly quickly. Really, the first social media platform that lasted for any length of time was Facebook. I joined on that first, I believe, in January of 2008. And at the time, there was legit competition. Facebook was actually the worst version of MySpace back in ye olden times. And now I look back at really having been an active Facebook user from 2008 to about 2020. By the time I got to 2020 and over 10 years of my life really kind of cataloged, and actually it's somewhat of a beautiful way when you think about it, because, you know, like all of my life is just kind of there in various ways for right. That long length of time. I also realized there were things about it that it just wasn't a healthy rhythm in my life. So oftentimes I would struggle with the amount of screen time on my phone and realize that Facebook was the main driver of keeping my phone screen time up, keeping me glued to my phone. It got to a point, I think maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, where my wife told me that it felt like my phone was the other woman. And that's when I was really
that's
thinking,
eye-opening.
Okay, this is not good. And I think where things really started to take a turn was in 2020. I mean, there was COVID making everyone crazy. There was America having a racial reckoning. It was an election year. I mean, it was a time when emotions on social media about everything were really high. In addition to the fact that we were all on COVID lockdown, we were stuck on this stuff more often. And what really occurred to me was that I just needed to get off. So a 40-day fast ended up turning into a 2.5-year fast. Technically, I'm on Facebook again, and I almost never use it. Yeah. That's really, I think, the that might be the nutshell encapsulation of a lot of our journeys with social media. I think we've gone through it, like as a society, through a time of really intense interest in it, noticed that there were side effects that we didn't like. And I think, very broadly speaking, a lot of people are second guessing their social media engagement.
Yeah. When I think of that question, for me, I'm about a decade older than you. So I can remember AOL instant messaging. That was I think the first of social medias where we could get on the computer and we could have conversations back and forth, typing and having that and what that looked like. And then, MySpace came around, I think around 2003. So I had just graduated college. I was entering into seminary and, the who's was kind of on MySpace at that time. And so, jumped on that and was a part of that. And then, once Facebook came along a year or two later, I think 2005, 2006, whenever that came, got onto Facebook. And, Twitter, Instagram, been a part of all of those in my life. And I would say at this point in my life, if my friendship, if the quality of me being a friend is valued by my engagement in social media, then I pretty much am awful at it. So I've never been really good at social media. I've tried several times to, engage and be, kind of a bright light in the social media world. And, I give it a really good effort for about 18 days. And then, everything starts to distance out. And so I have all of those. Very rarely do I check. In fact, on Instagram, I think I've had it for 10 years and I think I have 2 posts. And so, I think in a lot of ways, I'm probably like the stalker, the Facebook stalker or Instagram stalker. I can use it to see other people, but it's in part for my engagement into it. It's pretty lackluster. One of the things that you said while you were talking about it is we've all had this experience. And if we go back to the creation of MySpace, that was 2 decades ago, 20 years ago is when MySpace was created. And there seems to be in our culture, this legit fear of what social media is doing to us. A couple of years ago, Netflix did the documentary Social Dilemma that really raised awareness. In that, we were introduced to senior leadership of these social media companies that refuse to let their kids on social media because of what's happening and what's going on. And so you have these overseers who aren't allowing their own families to be a part of it. And then in that documentary also was one of the experts, Jaron Lanier, who has written quite extensively about social media. And one of his big things is that he even has it as a chapter in a book that social media hates your soul, which is really interesting because, as far as I know, he's not a believer. He doesn't seem particularly spiritual to me. However, even in terms of a secular experience, he sees that there is something in social media that's killing our soul. What do you think that he means by that statement?
So part of what he's talking about is the fact that there are pretensions among some of the folks who are developing these technologies to actually mechanically, technologically do the things that we proclaim that only God does, like resurrecting the dead. There's literally a project called Calico. I don't know very much about it, but there's this project called Calico. It's an alphabet company that is working on this thing that I think happened recently in Star Trek Picard, where you upload a person's consciousness to a robot computer situation, and in that way provide
like Captain America.
Life. Yeah. Well, something like that. And I don't think that's the whole thing. That's part of it. And I think there certainly are these bizarre godlike pretensions among some of the people who are responsible for the architecture of these technologies. But really, the main thing that Jaron Lanier was pointing at is that because of the impact, the formative impact that social media has on people, because that formative impact is so widespread throughout society, you need really big language to talk about what's going on. And he thinks that religion is really the best way to talk about such a widespread, far-reaching phenomenon that has such an impact on so many lives. And so one of the things that he says that is really arresting for a reader of his book. It's called 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Right Now. That argument that social media hates your soul, that's number 10. And he has this thing that's really arresting to read as a believer, is that whenever you engage in social media or really any kind of technology that's developed or that's based on an engine of attention extraction, which all social media is, what happens is you've effectively renounced your religion. Even if your religion is atheism, you have renounced your religion, because what's happened is your life and your practices and your worldview is starting to be shaped by this other party. And so I think the idea that he puts out is that our whole life practice can be considered its own religion when we're plugged in enough with social media. And for those of us who are followers of Jesus, then really we do have to raise the question of, is our practice of being engaged with social media actually conflicting with the life that we want to have as followers of Jesus?
Yeah. Tease that out a little bit. What does that look like? Where's the conflict come in terms of what social media is requesting of you and that we're kind of willingly giving, and how that maybe in like a easy example to grab a hold of how that detracts from a believer's walk with Jesus? Yeah.
So, one of the things that we're sold when we effectively buy into a social media platform is that it's designed to give us connection, and it's designed to give us information. And I think the connection and information is actually not what it's designed to do. What these platforms are designed to do is make money. And the way that it makes money is by extracting your attention. And the way that it extracts your attention is by using basically little hacks of your psychology to keep you coming back to the platform again and again and again. So fundamentally, these social media platforms, before their connection engines, before their means of information, I mean, they give you that, but all of that is actually just part of attention extraction. And really what it boils down to is a social media platform is a habit forming machine. Mm-hmm. The main thing that it is designed to do, because this is fundamental to the whole business model, the main thing that a social media platform is designed to do is to extract your attention. And because of that, it's therefore designed to fundamentally change something about you, because it's installing new habits in you. And so one of the ways that can actually be a very serious conflict with the kind of life that we would want to lead as followers of Jesus is that a lot of the things that the habits and the ways of life that Jesus calls us into are precisely the opposite of the things that an attention extraction engine will pull out of us. So one of the most poignant teachings of Jesus, you have this in Matthew 5. The chapter ends with, you have heard that it was said to you, you should love your neighbor and hate your enemies, but I tell you to love your enemies. And then at the beginning of that portion of Matthew chapter 5, he talks about how the murder command isn't satisfied just by failing to go out and killing people, but you actually have to not nurture anger in your heart. But the thing is that inclination to be against our enemies, that inclination to really hold on to anger, that taps into the part of us that is most ready to give attention in something. So that threat detection part of our psychology is a big attention magnet. And so social media platforms are naturally, if you're not trying, they're naturally going to try to pull your attention by feeding you the things that tick you off the most, feeding you the things that point out how other people are so bad and that they're your enemies. And all of that is part of changing your habits and shaping you as a person. And so I think one of the things that's really interesting about what you said with your encounters with social media is you try to be a bright light on there. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the first attempt at Christians engaging with social media is we got to go out there and give content to Christ. But a lot of the folks who are reflecting on the nature of social media are realizing that, I think it was Marshall McLuhan who once said, in critiquing television in the 60s, that the medium is the message. It's not about the content. And really, going onto a social media platform and posting cool devotionals. I mean, that's going to be that's kind of like, trying to do something about the ocean by putting food coloring in it. I mean, that's just going to have such a small impact on it, because the fundamental problem is the format. It's the engine, and it's the way the engine underneath these platforms is designed to form and shape you as a human being.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And, I think as you were just talking about that, and particularly using the Sermon on the Mount illustration, like the very thing that Jesus wants from us out of the Sermon on the Mount, right? One of the Beatitudes is to be peacemakers. Right. In the world. And all of social media is really designed for us to be the very opposite of that, to be conflict makers in that, or to engage in the conflicts of this world in a way that's not healthy. And so what we end up finding ourselves in kind of the fight as believers is the thing that we're engaged in is actually pulling us away from the very thing that Jesus wants us to be about.
That's right.
In our lives. And in doing so, we find ourselves in this crosshair. And I think in a conversation once, you said something to the degree that what the Roman Empire was to the early church and the New Testament that we read, social media is to Christians today, meaning a bit of that, you have this empire idea, and at the empire, really all of life revolves around the empire. And
that's right.
And there's not a lot that we can do to like tear down the empire. Like we're a part of that empire. And today, social media really is the empire of which all of our lives revolve around. And whether we acknowledge that or not, the reality is that social media is so huge that it affects all of our lives, whether we want to or not, whether we're on it or not. It has huge impact. And so maybe just help think through that statement a little bit more, because I think it's so profound in terms of the way that we as Christians think about social media and the way that we see the New Testament interact with the Roman Empire. And also at the same time, speak against the ills of the Roman Empire. So maybe just like tease all that out so that what I said makes sense to everybody who's listening.
Yeah. So really the reason why I think about social media as a kind of Roman Empire, or maybe like a diet empire in our lives today, is it really clicked for me when the Social Dilemma documentary came out, is recognizing that social media has it's an organizing factor in the operation of power.
Yes.
One of the things about empires is they're very, very big. And as these gigantic organizations that spread across, what effectively would have been the known world at the time, it was impossible for anyone to really micromanage the exercise of power. The way empires really got things done wasn't by straight dictation of what had to be done, but by setting up systems where the way everyone got what they were after revolved around the empire. So one example is this phenomenon in the New Testament era that the book of Revelation is actually pretty critical of, and it's the imperial cult. And it's these practices of just like doing these liturgies that would, pay obeisance to the emperor or something like that. And so, there are these ruins of these temples with pictures of emperors and maybe some Greek or Roman gods around them, kind of showing off how great the emperor was and all that.
And people would come there to worship them.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that absolutely was an alternative religion. But the interesting thing about imperial cults is that they did not exist as part of the emperor's exercise of power. They existed because the presence of empire was an organizing factor in how power was built. And so you would have the wealthy elites of a city or of a province, they would put up the imperial cult because they thought, hey, this will get us favor from the powers that be. This will get the emperor or maybe some Roman official to be like, hey, these people, they're part of our team, so we're going to help them with whatever they want. And so really the imperial cult, it was this thing that was wrapped up in empire, but it was actually part of the local elites trying to get done what they want to get done. And so in the same way, social media organizes power for the way people want to get things done. Like journalists whether or not they're within social media, whether or not they're thinking of readership within social media, if you are a journalist, you have to play by the rules of social media. That is the attention grabby rules. You have to have less nuance, a little bit more hyperbole. You really have to go, you have to be up to the minute on every development. And you have to basically tilt your content so that it competes with the other things fighting for attention on an attention grabbing engine. Because like it or not, a lot of your people are getting their content through social media feed. And this is the part that I think the shape of social media, whether or not you are on it, it is actually shaping what it's like for you to be in the world that you live in. Because you might not get your news magazines or newspapers through social media. You might be part of the 20% that's not engaging their news media that way. But the fact that the other 80% is engaging with their stuff through an attention grabbing platform means that the way the content is delivered to you is going to fundamentally appeal to that attention competition in the social media sphere. And so once again, it's not just that social media is dictating what's going on, but it's an organizing factor. And I mean, there's a lot of other things that go on. Like, I mean, people look back at the 2016 election, and I think actually the folks who architected social media probably didn't want Facebook to help Trump win. Like, it's not what they wanted, but their platform kind of organized a way that, looking back in retrospect, people are thinking, yeah, actually that was pretty helpful for it. And there's a lot of things that social media platforms have allowed to happen that the architects of social media don't agree with, but they've instituted a means by which other parties can get what they want done. And so it's an empire in the sense that it's an organizing factor that power revolves around.
Yeah. Well, and I say, as you were talking about just the way that it influences even the rest of life, even if you're not on social media, I think of like, the way that news channels, the way that news is delivered has really evolved since social media, right? So what we have less of today, whether it be CNN or CNBC or Fox News, what we have is less straight reporting of the news, like maybe we experienced in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? With Walter Cronkite, sitting at a news desk sharing the news, even though maybe it was a little bit slanted still in those moments, but there was a fairly even reporting of this is the event that happened, to where today in like much of our news that it's an opinion based, very fiery, passionate conversation, where you're always putting, in terms of a political sense, right, the Democrat versus the Republican, or in a sports sense, right? We've seen this recently, where you have people in the sporting world making huge comments that are hyperbole, that are blowing up all over. And all of that is to grab attention. And so even in our news, whether it be, political news or National Geographic news or sporting news, that news has all evolved into this attention grabbing medium that doesn't so much allow us just to see the news for what it is without hearing actual opinion of the powers that be to try to sway us in one direction or another. And so I just see the way that social media has like very much impacted, even if you're not on it, what that looks like. And even, going back further, I think it was, President Obama who really leveraged social media in his presidential campaign that really won over kind of the younger generation of Americans through the use of social media, and then how much that rocketed in 2016 with Trump, and then we saw the how would I put it, the really adverse effects of social media during the 2020 campaign.
That's right.
Right. When you had both sides trying to leverage that and creating just absolute conflict in our nation too, just this last week, or even this week, of the Speaker of the House.
That's right.
Right. Getting booted yesterday. And then on social media today, all the attention grabbing of the senators the representatives who are now like positioning themselves and speaking on social media, in this attention grabbing way of really trying to further what it is that the power that they're up after in that. And so
that's right.
So I can see the effects of what you're speaking to everywhere. So when we think about this, oftentimes I think as Christians, the reality is that when it comes to social media, we feel like there's like basically one of two options, right? That we either isolate ourselves from it and pretend that it doesn't exist, or, we try to jump headlong into it, and, pour food coloring into the ocean.
Yeah.
Or, you have it maybe like me, but it's just like a nuisance in the background as opposed to something that's really engaged. So like from your perspective, like what is, if it really is an empire that is dictating so much in our lives, what is our responsibility in it? We can't leave the empire. That's a physical reality. So it's influencing us. So what does it look like to have a healthy rhythm living within it?
Yeah, I think one of the things that the early Christians did when they were living under the shadow of the Roman Empire is, they would enact civil disobedience, and so what that would look like is, they would be more or less compliant, like you have in Romans 13, the concept that, okay, yeah, God has allowed the Roman Empire to be here. And in one sense saying like, we're not trying to start a riot and burn the whole thing to the ground on the one. And so, there's not directly fighting against it, but Christians would equally boldly proclaim that Jesus is Lord. And if Jesus is Lord, then Caesar is not. And that would have all kinds of implications for the ways they would live their lives. And, it would get to the point where, maybe Christians, they would be the ones getting crucified the way Jesus himself was. They would be the ones, starting in the second and going into the third centuries, they would be the ones getting persecuted and just accepting the consequences of fundamentally living a life that was in conflict with the dictates of the empire. And the beautiful thing about the diet empire that we live in is that there are no gladiatorial contests. There are no lions that we are going to get thrown to if we choose not to comply with the rules of the empire of the attention economy. It's, what Jaron Lanier calls an empire for rent. You can think of it as a diet empire. It has imperial qualities, but there's really nobody, marching into battle with like a Facebook flag or something like that. Like that's just not a thing that actually happens. And so we have this situation where it's easier in some senses to say no to the dictates of this empire, and really what that looks like is I think recognizing that is just recognizing social media not for what it is sold to be, but for what it is. Recognizing that social media is not fundamentally a connection machine, because it's actually not primarily built to be a connection machine. It is built to be a money-making machine, which means it's built to be an attention extraction and habit formation machine. That is its primary function. And the connection and the information and the fun pieces of that, the entertainment pieces of that, all of those are just tactics that feed into the attention grabbing engine. And so really, I think the fundamental thing that you have to do is you have to say like, this attention grabbing engine is not going to be setting the rules by which I live my life. And what that's going to do is that's going to require a lot of intentionality and a level of intentionality that can be really difficult to enact. You almost have to treat your interactions with technology like it's a kind of addiction. And you have to say like, well, I don't want to be addicted to this. So I'm actually going to very intentionally limit the amount of time that I have involved in it. So, there's a lot of things that you can do to that effect. What you can do is, you can put your phone to bed way across the house, far from your bed every night, not look at it for the first half hour before you get up in the morning. You can have a screen time limit put on for certain addicting apps that maybe your spouse or someone else in your household has access to. So you can't just like push a button and then get on the other side of your time limit screen popping up. I mean, and the thing is, you really have to treat it like that. And I realize there can be this element of shame when you're treating it as an addiction almost, because it's like, well, no, I'm not really an addict. I'm not really addicted. But the thing is like even more so than addictive substances. I mean, addictive substances, they exist and they just happen to be addictive in virtue of their chemical properties. Social media is actually designed to pull in your attention more and more. Yeah. It's designed to addict you. And so I don't think there's shame in just having a plan for your household to wrangle these technologies. I think if you are not just going to delete your accounts right now, that's the easiest thing to do because then you don't have to think about it. But if you're not going to do that, then realize that being plugged into social media, YouTube is also part of this, really anything that has that attention capture engine, that if you're going to allow it in your life, what you're also doing is you're also signing up for the baggage of having a plan to wrangle, having habits that work for your lives to keep your total amount of time under control, and basically just sort of admit to yourself, like, look, I'm a human being and I live my life through a psychology that these machines are able to hack. Yeah. Therefore, I am going to have habits that I intentionally, publicly, with my family commit to. Yeah. That's going to restrain that. Yep. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that you failed. That just means that you're a human being and that you live in a world where there are technologies that just take advantage of features of being a human being for monetary gain.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think in my household and family, like one of the habits that we've done is, and that I've taught my kids, is anytime you download a new app, you deny the notifications, right? So that, when somebody posts on a Facebook feed, right, instead of it delivering that notification every time a post happens, or, whatever the algorithm says, you need to be reminded every hour to check this. We're just not going to do that. We're turning off the notifications. And so, if I want to get on whatever platform it is by my choice of clicking the button. You speak about screen time, and that's a huge thing as well, that, particularly with my kids' phones, they have screen time limits set up, not just for social media, but for all of their media. Cause you can get lost in the gaming world. You can get lost in so many things. And so, there's that. And once that limit's hit, they can make a request, to me to either give them more, 15 minutes, an hour, all day, whatever it is. And so it's not just a hard no, but it is for me to discern in their lives at this point. One of the things that my wife and I are wrestling through actually is, how do we start to teach that to our kids? How do we teach them the disciplines where it's not dad, managing their time for them, but particularly with my oldest, like, how do we help him now that he's, 15? 3 years, he'll be out of the house, in terms of as an adult in this world. And so are we putting within him the structures of discipline for him to manage his own life? I also think, like, with the Apple stuff, if you're on the Apple, and I'm sure Android has the same thing, but, they're constantly working at creating programs within that help protect you either from yourself or from the programs that are right. And so, like, one of the things you and I were talking about beforehand is Apple has great pornography filters within their phone. And so those are turned on, and so even by chance images can't be put up, or even through like text messaging, if there's anything that's questionable, my phone gets alerted that there's questionable material coming across. And so those are just some of the ways that we've tried to manage it in our own home. And for Sarah and I, we have been very slow to allow our kids to be on social media, only because as a pastor, I can't count the number of teenagers and parents that I've spoken to where this has absolutely ruined their lives, whether it was bullying, whether it's led to anxiety or depression because of what do they call it? The best life, our best life is always put on social media, not our real life. And have just been in a number of situations to where I almost feel a little bit like an emergency room doctor, I realize that, I have a buddy, and 50 times a year, a kid gets hit by a baseball in the United States in the chest that stops their heart. So it's 50 times that happens over the course of a, population of 3 million. But he would see it regularly because he was an emergency room doctor. And so when his kids started playing sports, there was a little bit of fear, like, man, my kid's going to get hit in the chest. Right. The reality is that it was smaller than what his fear was, but it still moved him. And I think that's a little bit of how I've just seen the ugly side of social media and what it does, particularly to teenagers, that there's a little bit of like, how do I protect my kids in this? And at the same time, wrestle with how do I teach them? I know that they're going to be there eventually in their lives. How do I help them live within the empire? And so, I mean, we could go on for this for a long time, but we need to kind of wrap this up. And so, is there a quick 60-second thought in terms of what you would speak to believers when it comes to social media that you would want as like the summary of this conversation?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is, if you're going to have social media or attention grabbing platforms in your lives, it's just boilerplate. Don't wait for something to go wrong before you say, I need a plan and a practice in place. I need habits and rules that we're adopting as a family to control the addicting impact of this. And just admit, like, hey, I'm a human being and I'm vulnerable to this. And so it's okay for me to need a plan to wrangle the addicting impact of these technologies. And the other thing, really the big hope piece is that, that our churches are these places where vibrant in-person community can happen, where you can be known by someone in this really beautiful, unedited, slow-moving kind of way that flagrantly violates all the rules of the attention economy. Yeah. And so really where I'm at is I recognize that social media can form us in the opposite of the direction that Jesus is calling to. But what that means is that by being followers of Jesus and adopting the way of life that Jesus calls us into, we can be counteracting the effects of social media. And so what can happen is the church in the 21st century can actually be ahead of the curve, because while the entire world is recognizing, hey, our digital technology is kind of spiraling out of control, we can be a community of people who are saying, look, we have these practices that followers of Jesus have been refining for 2,000 years that we live out today. And so we can actually be a shining light for what's next after everyone's kind of had this first big contact with these artificial intelligence algorithms that have started shaping life. And so the amazing thing is, I think, as followers of Jesus and as practitioners of vibrant alternative community, we can actually be ahead of the curve on technology, which is kind of the last thing you'd expect for church world. But I absolutely think we can do it.
That's a really good last word, John. Thank you for your time today. Thanks for joining us as James grooms his beard. And one of the great things that we're doing here at Crossroads right now is we're going through a series on friendship that you can check out at crossroadsabc.com. That's all we have for you today. And so hopefully you have a good week, and we'll catch you in the next couple of weeks. Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to Collision. This podcast is a production of Crossroads Church in Thornton, Colorado. For more excellent content, please visit crossroadsabc.com.